You ever stand in front of those like ancient cave paintings?
Oh, yeah.
You almost feel like a connection to the artist.
Right.
It's like their consciousness is somehow reaching across time. And
That's powerful, right? And what's so interesting is that this like intuitive sense of connection might be more literal than we realize. And so that's what we're kind of diving into today
okay.
with this excerpt. Consciousness isn't in your skull. And it challenges that traditional idea that consciousness is just a product of the brain.
So instead of like the brain being the generator of consciousness, it's more like a receiver.
Exactly. Think of it like a radio.
Okay.
The radio itself doesn't create the music. It tunes into radio waves that are already out there.
Right.
Similarly, the brain might be tuning into a pre-existing field of consciousness.
I'm starting to see where this is going, but how do cave paintings fit into all of this?
Well, the excerpt uses this vivid imagery to explain the concept. You know, it suggests that the cave painter wasn't just expressing their individual thoughts and feelings, but tapping into a shared consciousness that flows through time.
Okay.
It's like they were leaving a message not just for their contemporaries, but for us, thousands of years later.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
So are we all just swimming in this like sea of consciousness?
That's the core concept here.
Yeah.
You know, the excerpt talks about plexus points, areas where this field of consciousness is concentrated.
Okay.
Think of it like energy centers,
Yeah.
where this universal consciousness converges.
And these plexus points are like what chakras, acupuncture meridians? I'm trying to wrap my head around this.
You can think of them in those terms. Yes, it's like these points are where the individual connects with the universal.
Right.
The excerpt doesn't go into specific traditions, but the idea is that we're not isolated islands of awareness, but part of a vast interconnected network.
And we can tap into this network, actually experience it.
That's what's so fascinating about this concept. Think about those moments of stillness, when you can almost feel a subtle hum, a vibration that seems to permeate everything.
Right.
The excerpt suggests that this hum could be a manifestation of the field itself.
Okay, now you're really making me think. I've definitely felt that hum before, especially when I'm out in nature. It's like a sense of deep peace and connection. But are we saying that consciousness actually exists outside of our brains?
Right.
That it's not just a product of our neural activity?
That's the fundamental shift in perspective that the excerpt is proposing. It's a pretty radical departure from the mainstream scientific view. But there are some intriguing arguments to support it.
Like what kind of evidence is there for this idea of a field of consciousness? I mean, it sounds pretty far out there.
Well, it's certainly difficult to prove scientifically, but there are a few anomalies that hint at a deeper reality. The excerpt mentions the double slit experiment, for example.
Refresh my memory on that one.
Yeah, it's a famous experiment in quantum physics that showed that light can behave like both a wave and a particle, depending on whether it's being observed or not.
So our observation, our consciousness, is actually influencing the behavior of matter.
Exactly. It's a mind-bending concept, but it suggests that consciousness might play a more fundamental role in shaping reality than we previously thought. And then there's the work of Dean Radin.
Okay, tell me about that.
Radin's research focused on the power of intention. He found that people could actually influence the outcome of random events like dice rolls simply by focusing their minds on a particular result.
So our thoughts, our intentions can have a tangible impact on the world around us. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it challenges our conventional understanding of cause and effect, you know?
Right.
If consciousness can influence matter, then maybe we're not just passive observers in this reality, but active participants.
And what about the role of time in all of this? The excerpt mentioned something about time being more like an ocean than a straight line.
Right. The excerpt describes time as a fluid ocean with swirling currents.
Okay.
Past, present, and future aren't necessarily separate compartments, but all exist simultaneously within this field. And if that's true, it could explain how we can feel connected to past consciousness, like those cave painters, for example.
Right.
Maybe their thoughts, their intentions are still rippling through this field, and we're picking up on those subtle vibrations.
Whoa, okay, this is starting to feel like we're entering the Matrix or something.
Mm-hmm.
So if consciousness isn't limited to our skulls, if it's this vast interconnected field, then what does that mean for us, for humanity?
That's a big question, isn't it? If we're all connected through this field, then our actions, our thoughts, our intentions, they all have ripples. We're not as separate and isolated as we might think.
It's like we're all part of this giant cosmic web, and every thought we have, every action we take is sending out vibrations that affect the entire web.
And just as we can influence the field can influence us. It's a two-way street.
This has given me a whole new perspective on things, but how do we even begin to prove any of this scientifically? I mean, it's pretty out there.
You're right. It's definitely challenging to measure or quantify something as subtle and pervasive as a field of consciousness. But the excerpt does mention a few intriguing anomalies that hint at a deeper reality, and that's what we'll dive into next.
Okay, so we've got these hints, these anomalies. Walk me through those. What else is happening in this script?
Well, one example that really stands out is the work of Nassim Haramein. He's a physicist who has some very unique ideas.
Unique, how?
He suggests that the vacuum of space, what we think of as empty, is actually a highly energetic field.
Oh, wow.
And it's from this field, this quantum vacuum, as he calls it, that particles like protons emerge.
Hold on, I'm trying to keep up protons like the stuff in atoms that are popping out of empty space.
Not quite empty, more like a sea of potential settle. Haramein believes this field is incredibly dense, with energy far beyond what we can currently measure, and it's this energy that spins protons into form, creating the building blocks of matter.
But how does consciousness fit into this? It's protons and energy fields. Losing the thread back to the cave painters.
Haramein proposes that information or consciousness is encoded within this field. Think of it like a blueprint that guides the organization of matter. Consciousness, in a sense, is the architect of reality.
Okay, now that is a mind-blowing concept. So it's not just that we tap into a field of consciousness, but that consciousness is somehow involved in the creation of matter itself.
Precisely. Haramein's work suggests that consciousness isn't just something that arises from matter, it's actually fundamental to the universe. It's a bit like the chicken and the egg question, what comes first, matter or consciousness? Haramein argues it's consciousness.
But isn't that a bit of a leap? I mean, how do you even begin to prove something like that?
It's definitely on the edge of scientific understanding, but it's grounded in some intriguing physics and mathematics. He uses concepts from quantum physics, black hole theory, even ancient geometry to build his model.
Okay, so it's not just some random idea he pulled out of thin air. There's actual science behind it.
Yes, though it's fair to say it's not widely accepted, yet his theories are complex, and they challenge some deeply held assumptions about the nature of reality. But for many, his work opens up a whole new way of thinking about the universe and our place in it.
But it's also exciting to think about the possibilities. If we could learn to harness the power of our consciousness, who knows what we might be capable of? We could revolutionize medicine technology, maybe even solve some of the world's biggest problems.
It's a vision that many people are exploring. There's growing interest in fields like energy healing, quantum biology, even consciousness engineering. It's all very cutting edge, but who knows what the future holds?
It's both thrilling and a little bit scary, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a lot of responsibility to think that our thoughts, our intentions could have such a profound impact on the world. But if we can learn to use this power wisely, the potential for positive change is enormous.
It makes you realize that we're not just cogs in a machine. We're active participants in creating reality.
Yeah. And perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from this whole discussion. We are not separate from the universe. We are an integral part of it. And our consciousness is not just a byproduct of our brains. It's a fundamental force that shapes the world around us.
So if I'm getting this right, we're not just receiving this field of consciousness, we're also transmitting to it every thought, every feeling is sending ripples through the web.
Exactly. It's a constant feedback loop. We're both influenced by the field and influencing the field. And the more aware we become of this interconnectedness, the more conscious we can be in our actions and our creations.
Okay, that's pretty deep stuff. And speaking of deep, this whole discussion about Haramein and the quantum vacuum, it's fascinating, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
You're right. There's much more to explore. But for now, let's shift gears a bit and revisit the idea of time as a fluid ocean. Remember that concept from the excerpt?
Yeah, the idea that the past, present, and future aren't really separate, but all swirling together in this cosmic soup. But how does that actually work? I mean, it sounds cool in theory, but what are the implications for our everyday lives?
That's where things get really interesting. And that's exactly what we'll delve into next. So we've got this whole idea of time as a swirling ocean, not a rigid line.
Right.
What's fascinating is this isn't just some abstract philosophical idea.
Yeah.
It has real implications for how we understand our lives, even our decisions.
Okay, give me an example. How does time as an ocean play out in real life?
Think about how we often get stuck in regret about the past or anxieties about the future. What if those feelings aren't just psychological, but echoes from other points in that time ocean?
You're saying those other times are bleeding into the present somehow, but wouldn't that mean we have less control, like our choices don't matter if it's all one big soup?
That's where it gets tricky. The excerpt doesn't give a clear answer.
Right.
And truthfully, no one really knows, but some interpretations suggest it's more like imagine a whirlpool in that ocean.
Okay.
Our focused consciousness here and now is the center,
Right.
but the currents swirling around are those other times influencing us subtly?
So maybe that gut feeling we sometimes have, that sense of knowing something, could that be an echo from a future possibility rippling back to us?
It's a compelling thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, it changes how we view decision making,
Mm.
not as just weighing pros and cons in this moment, but potentially being sensitive to these ripples from the broader time ocean.
Okay, that's both cool and kind of terrifying. Like, how do we even know if we're making our own choices or just being nudged by these cosmic currents?
That's the million-dollar question, and one the excerpt leaves open for us to ponder. But if this model of time holds any water, it makes those moments of stillness even more crucial.
Right, because that's when we can quiet the mental noise and maybe tune into those subtler signals, like you were saying earlier. But how does this all connect back to consciousness being outside our skulls? Is time part of that same field, or is this something else entirely?
That's where things get really fascinating because there are hints in the excerpt and in some of Harameem's work that consciousness and time might be even more intertwined than we realize. Imagine it like this. If consciousness is the ocean itself, then time is the movement of the waves within it.
So no consciousness, no time. That's pretty heavy stuff.
Yes.
But if that's the case, it makes those ancient cave paintings even more mind-blowing.
Right.
They were literally leaving a mark on the fabric of reality, a ripple that's still echoing through this vast ocean of consciousness and time.
And makes you wonder, what ripples are we creating? What marks will we leave on the universe?
That's a powerful question to end on. It makes you realize that every thought, every action, every creation is contributing to the tapestry of reality. It's a reminder to be mindful, to be intentional, and to create something beautiful and meaningful with the time we have.
Well said. And who knows, maybe in those quiet moments when we tune into that hum of the universe, we'll find the inspiration to create our own masterpiece, our own cave painting that'll echo through time and touch the lives of others. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
The pleasure was all mine. And for all of you listening out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep creating those ripples of consciousness that make this universe such an amazing and mysterious place.